Alex, if you're going to accuse someone of spreading misinformation, I think it's important you should get your facts right. It wasn't just the Free Speech Union account, it was my personal account and the account of the Daily Skeptic that were closed by PayPal, and they were closed by PayPal in September of this year, not 2020. And whilst PayPal did cite spreading misinformation about the COVID-19 vaccines as one of several reasons they ran up the flagpole for doing it, that was on the Daily Skeptic, not Twitter. They subsequently resiled because they restored my account about 2 weeks later after I kicked up an almighty fuss in the media and in Parliament. But apart from that, spot on. Freedom of speech should not mean freedom from consequences. I wonder if you'd include what happened to Salman Rushdie earlier this year as a consequence of free speech. But look, before we get into the substance of this, I just want to tell you how puzzled I was by one of the phrases. This House believes woke culture has gone too far. It was the conjunction of the words woke and culture, because what is woke culture? So Christian civilization has the King James Bible, the Cathedral of Notre Dame, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, Handel's Messiah. Modernism has Tchaikovsky, Picasso, Frank Lloyd Wright, Virginia Woolf. What art and culture has the woke cult given rise to? She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, Meghan Markle's podcast, the collected works of Owen Jones. The phrase woke culture is an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms, like social distancing and military intelligence. Gone too far. Woke culture has yet to get beyond the embryo stage. It's a cultural desert, a gaping void. But perhaps I'm being too literal. I assume we're talking about the ideological movement, the intersectionality cult, the oppression Olympics, the critical theories, as James Lindsay would put it, the grievance industrial complex, the great awakening, Woker's day, what Orwell would have referred to as a smelly little orthodoxy. So first let me acknowledge, Alex, that the moral impulse underpinning this movement is laudable. Wanting to reduce prejudice and discrimination and improve outcomes for historically disadvantaged groups is an admirable goal. We can quibble about the inconsistent ways in which woke moral standards are applied. In fact, let's quibble. If you think slavery is abhorrent, why focus on the historical involvement of Britain and America in the slave trade and turn a blind eye to the enslavement of nigh on 2 million Uyghurs in contemporary China, or the 200,000 people imprisoned in labor camps in North Korea? If you care about women's rights, why neglect the plight of women in Iran, who risk being beaten to death by the religious police if they don't wear the hijab? If you care about social injustice, why obsess over the inequality of different identity groups and ignore class inequalities, surely a much more pervasive source of injustice? I often suspect the reason this doctrine has gained such purchase in private schools and elite universities is so people who, according to a traditional left-wing perspective, are extraordinarily privileged, can claim to be victims of oppression. I'm also puzzled by the stubborn refusal of the social justice warriors to acknowledge any of the good things about Britain, as well as itemizing the bad. Yes, the British Empire participated in the slave trade, but then so did every other empire, stretching back to ancient Greece and beyond. What makes the British Empire exceptional is that we were the first empire in history to pass a law abolishing slavery and commit blood and treasure to ending it across the world. Only a fool would say people of colour don't have to contend with prejudice and discrimination in contemporary Britain. But according to most international surveys, Britain is amongst the least racist countries in the world. A Swedish survey carried out in 2013 asked people in 80 different countries. Yes?
But you talk about British colonialism as if it's in the past. But why don't we talk about Northern Ireland? The fact that Britain is currently colonising the north of Ireland. It is a continuous instance.
Well, if the
British colonial system is not in the past, it's current, it's happening. in my country.
Okay. I don't think of Great Britain and Northern Ireland as one country colonizing another. As I understand it, a majority of the people in Northern Ireland want to be part of the United Kingdom. Should that change, should there be a referendum and a majority of the people in Northern Ireland vote to become part of the island of Ireland, then of course I'd accept that verdict. But as I understand it, at the moment, it's fairly close, but still a majority want to be part of the United Kingdom. So let me just go on. So the evidence that Britain is among the least racist countries in the world. So a group of Swedish researchers in 2013 asked people in 80 different countries whether they'd object to people of a different race moving in next door. This is a way of measuring how racist people are. And the percentage objecting in the UK was between 0 and 5%, whereas in other countries, in Jordan, for instance, more than 40% objected. In another recent survey measuring how racist different countries were, the country that was identified as the most racist in the world was Qatar. But no doubt, if the English footballers just go down on one knee and raise a fist, they'll magically make it go away. Okay, enough quibbling. Setting aside the bias and the double standards, there's nothing wrong with wanting to improve outcomes for historically disadvantaged groups. There's nothing wrong with the ideals you identified as the ideals of the woke movement. The objection to woke culture is not the end the woke are pursuing, but the means they use to pursue it. At the Free Speech Union, we get an average of 50 cries for help a week, and the vast majority are from people who find themselves on the sharp end of a Twitchfork mob. And the favoured methods of the woke finder generals, as I'm sure all of you know, is not to argue, to persuade, to debate, but to smear, to ostracize, to publicly shame, to cancel. I'll give you an example. One of the first cases the Free Speech Union took up was here at Oxford. Professor of Modern History, Selina Todd, helped arrange a feminist conference at Exeter College, and it was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of a famous feminist conference organized at Exeter College 50 years ago. At the last minute, several of the speakers, and don't forget, she'd helped to organize this event, she'd helped raise money for it, she'd thrown herself into it. At the last minute, several of the speakers due to speak on the opening day said they couldn't appear on the same platform as her because of her gender-critical views. And so the organizers of the conference pretty much immediately disinvited her. That, I'm afraid, is the tactics of the woke. This is the way they go about trying to achieve their objectives. Another example, Kathleen Stock, who was essentially a professor of philosophy at Sussex. I'm sure most of you are familiar with her. Another person we tried to help. She was essentially hounded off Sussex University campus because a group of student activists on campus disagreed with her point of view about the conflict between sex-based women's rights and trans rights. Without taking sides on that particular issue, how many of you think that that is the right way to go about trying to conduct a debate in the public square, to try and win someone over to your point of view? And these kinds of tactics, this all-pervasive cancel culture, has created a climate of fear at British universities. According to a recent report of the Legatum Institute, 35% of UK academics self-censor for fear of retribution, rising to 75% for the tiny minority of conservative academics. Meanwhile, a quarter of students in British universities, according to this survey, self-censor, rising to 59% of conservative supporting students. And these tactics are self-defeating. The woke don't succeed in persuading people of the rightness of their point of view any more than the totalitarian methods of Communist Party states during the Cold War persuaded their populations to embrace Marxist-Leninism. I'd go further and say that the terror tactics of the woke movement actively harm the disadvantaged groups they're seeking to help. And a good example is the fate of the Gender Recognition Act and the fate of the Tavistock. I mean, you can say, well, the reason the Gender Recognition Act wasn't in the end reformed after a lengthy consultation, and the reason the Tavistock is in the process of being shut down is because the current Tory government are all transphobes and bigots. But that's not really... No, okay, sure.
Was it not the case that the Tavistock clinic was closed because its head for transgender and gender non-conforming individuals was not sufficient, and local regional gender identity clinics are now being opened by the Tory government to address this?
Yes, I think that is true, but the point I was going to go on to say that you can't blame the decision to abandon the proposed reforms of the Gender Recognition Act, as well as the decision to shut down the Tavistock, on the transphobic Tory government, because as recently as 3 years ago, the Tory government was in favour of making it easier for trans people to legally change their gender, and the Gender Recognition Act was going to be reformed along those lines. There was no movement to try and shut down the Tavistock clinic or to draw attention to the medical harms it may or may not have been causing, but the reason the Conservative government has changed tack on that issue, the reason it isn't doing more to defend trans rights, is because the trans rights activists have lost the public debate. Why have they lost the public debate? Because shaming people, calling them names, standing outside debates and screaming bigot, TERF, transphobe, does not, funnily enough, persuade the public to sympathise with their point of view. The refusal to debate, the insistence on no platforming, the idea that if they share a platform with someone like Selina Todd, they're going to become contaminated because they're standing next to her, almost as though it's like being a TERF is a virus you can catch. This is not the way to prosecute a debate in the public square. It hasn't helped trans people, and the woke only have themselves to blame for not engaging in a constructive, good-humoured, respectful way in this public debate. It's self-defeating. They've harmed the cause they were promoting. So, in summary, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the moral values of the woke, with their agenda, with supporting BLM, with supporting Pride. All of these things are in their own way admirable. And I think I'm sure everyone on this side of the House supports those ideals. But going about it with the zeal and fanaticism that you do, with the dogmatism and intolerance, I'm afraid means that the culture of woke has gone too far. Thank you.